Good evening, and I hope all of you are doing fine. Welcome to today's session. In today's session, we are going to again talk about para-jumbles. We discussed para-jumbles in the last class. That was an introduction class. We discussed the types of questions that one can expect, the different question formats, and type in the answer type questions and MCQ type questions, and the different types of MCQ questions that one can expect. And we solved a few questions. We also learned certain tips and techniques that can help us solve questions effectively, and that could, help us, or the question, when we look at it, what all clues should we look for in order to help us understand the correct sequence of the paragraph that we need to follow. So on that note, in today's class, again, we are going to quickly revise those tips, those techniques. We'll go through all the tricks once quickly, very quickly, because we've already discussed them in the previous class. If you've not watched that video, please go and do watch that video. It's an introductory video on para-jumbles. And today, after we, kind of revise whatever we did in the last class, we would solve some questions, and some questions that are difficult than the questions we solved in the last class. So, without any further ado, let's start with today's session. So, very quickly, we'll go through the tips and tricks that we discussed in the last class. This is going to be a very quick revision because we discussed these things in grave detail in the last class. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these tips and tricks. So, we'll just quickly brush through. So, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is to identify our opening statement and identify our concluding statement as well, right? When we look at an opening statement, or when we look at a statement that should introduce a particular topic, it should be general, right? An opening statement should be as broad as possible, as general as possible. It should introduce a broad topic. It should concentrate on or focus on something which is general rather than something which is specific, right? Something which is very specific, something which is very fact or detail oriented. It is very unlikely for it to be the opening statement or the introductory statement of any paragraph. Could be possible at times, right? But it is unlikely. So an opening statement or an introductory statement has to be something which is a general topic, which is a broad topic, right? It should not begin with any pronoun. It should not begin with any transition word, because a pronoun or a transition word, these words, they need prior context, right? If you're using a pronoun, there should be a noun for which you're using that pronoun. Transition words kind of link two sentences together. So again, cannot use it without prior context. So it is very unlikely that an opening statement would begin with a pronoun or a transition word, and it should not, refer to anything that has been stated earlier, right? An opening sentence should be an introductory thought. It should not relate to something which has been stated earlier. If a sentence makes sense without any prior context, it might be the opening statement. If a sentence makes perfect sense without any prior context, without any reference, then it might be your opening statement, right? Moving on. Spot sentence connectors to track a logical flow. Now, connectors, they indicate how ideas relate with each other, right? So, contrast is shown by words like however, but. Sequence is shown by words like then, later. When you're adding something to a sentence, right? Adding more information to a sentence. You use words like moreover, additionally. And when you're explaining causes, when you're determining a cause and effect relationship, you tend to use words like because, therefore, as a result of which, so, does, right? So, again, you need to look at these keywords. They could act as good clues into determining the sequence of different sentences. For example, sentence A says Ravi didn't study for his test, and sentence B says as a result he failed. So it is very evident that A is the cause and B is the effect of that cause, right? So it is again very evident that B cannot come first. It cannot come before A. Because whenever we discussed this in the last class, first of all, cause and effect would form a mandatory pair. So that would again be a great clue for us. In MCQ type questions, it would be an excellent help. And again, cause and effect, they form a mandatory pair. And always, whenever we are kind of sequencing, we should always remember that we put the cause first because that is the reason something is happening, right? That is the reason something has occurred or is happening. So we keep this as our first sentence and then the effect should follow. So B will follow A. So first, Ravi didn't study for the test and then as a result, he failed. I cannot say as a result he failed and then Ravi didn't study for his test. That does not make sense. Next, pronouns like he, she, it, this, and such always refer back to something which has been previously mentioned. Noun, pronoun. Noun pronoun relationship. Whenever we spot pronouns like he, she, who is this he that we are talking about? Who is this she that we are talking about? We need prior context pertaining to these pronouns, right? So, always a sentence starting with a pronoun cannot be the first one because, as we discussed, the first sentence, the introductory sentence, should not require any prior reference or any prior context. It should be self sufficient in itself, it should make sense without any prior context. So, sentences starting with a pronoun, it is unlikely that they would make up an introductory statement. For example, Henry is my dog and he is loud and loves to run. Now, I have to introduce Henry first and then only I can use he. I cannot first use he and then introduce Henry. Because who is this he? We have no idea. We need to have an idea first about who is this he. So I need to introduce Henry first and then I would point out his characteristics. He's loud, he loves to run, etc. etc. So A would come first and then B would follow. B cannot be first. Next, mandatory pairs. Find mandatory pairs. Mandatory pairs are sentences that must go together. Right? Mandatory pairs are sentences that always follow each other. Some examples of mandatory pair: cause and effect, statement and example. You're stating something and then you're giving examples to that statement. You're providing supporting evidences to that statement. So that could form a mandatory pair: statement and example. Question and answer. A question has been asked and then an answer to that question has been given. So first question and then the answer again could form an excellent mandatory pair. Subject pronoun reference. A subject is being introduced and then a pronoun that points back to that subject. That could make an excellent mandatory pair. So always look out for mandatory pairs. Next, look for time indicators. Example: initially, eventually, now. Right? Always maintain this chronology. Always maintain time chronology, right? You'll talk about something that has happened a few years ago first, then probably you'll talk about something that is happening now. You cannot talk about something that is happening now first and then talk about what has happened previously. That doesn't make sense. We need to maintain a chronological order as far as time sequences are concerned. So, for example, we have three sentences. At first, scientists believed the atom was indivisible. Later, discoveries showed otherwise. Today, atomic theory is more refined than ever. So, we'll first give preference to something that has occurred or that happened in the past, right? Then, a contradiction to that statement, and we'll finally talk about what is happening at present, right? We'll talk about today. So past, and then if there was a line that said in the future or 10 years down the line or after 10 years, that statement would have come after C because it talks about the future. What would probably happen in the future? So, in that case, it would have been A, B, C, and D. So, this is something that you need to look out for. Next, tone matching for start and end. Opening tone, as we've already discussed this, it should be broad, it should be general, it should be neutral, and it should be introductory. Ending tone should be kind of summarizing something, summation of something, inference, or concluding remark. A conclusion and if inference could probably make good closing statements. Example of ending sentences. This proves how impactful early education can be. Such practices must be encouraged in the future, right? So, inference based statements, conclusion based statements, final summation based statements could make good closing statements. Next, let us start with some examples now. We'll start with type in the answer type questions in which no MCQ choices are given. You have to type in the correct sequence, whatever you feel is the correct sequence. You have to type in that correct sequence. After that, we'll move on to 4-sentence para-jumbles. Then we'll move on to 5-sentence para-jumbles, and then we would also discuss a few questions in which the introductory and the concluding statement, those two statements are fixed, and we have to kind of put into sequence the rest of the statements that occur in between these two statements. So let's start with the first question. Um, the oldest fossil, grasses are just 70 million years old, although grass may have evolved a bit earlier than that. Okay, at first glance, at first look, this could be an introductory statement. It talks about grasses, it talks about a general theme, doesn't use any pronouns or any transition words as such, any demonstrative pronouns as such that point back or reference back to something. So, could be. But let's have a look at the other options as well. There have been land plants for 465 million years, yet there were no flowers for over 2/3 of that time. Again, this could also be a good introductory statement. Next, the equally familiar grasses appeared even more recently. Last, flowering plants only appeared in the middle of the dinosaur era. So now we've talked about flowers in the second statement, and continuation of that has been talked about in the last statement, which is statement D. So there have been land plants for 465 million years, yet there were no flowers for over two-thirds of that time. And then we talk about flowering plants only appeared in the middle of the dinosaur era. And then we talk about the equally familiar with what? With the flowers. Equally familiar with what prior context setting has been done here. Equally familiar with the flowering plants. So equally familiar grasses appeared even more recently, and then C has been further elaborated in statement A. The oldest fossil grasses are just 70 million years old, although grass may have evolved a bit earlier than that. So first B, it introduces the idea of how there were land plants, which is the general topic. Grasses would also come under land plants and flowers would also come under land plants. So we need to talk about land plants first before we talk about flowers or before we talk about grasses. Then D should come right after B because it is a continuation. Then C and lastly A. So B, D, C, A should be the correct sequence here. On athletes may not be role models, but they are certainly digital lightning rods. Now, why is this statement given here? Is there any prior context setting that needs to be done? Let's have a look at the second statement. Nearly 20 years ago, athletes did as they pleased, only entering the public news scope if an off-the-court field dust-up was so monumental that the nightly news couldn't afford not to cover it. Athletes might want the ability to make millions while still being able to crack off tilter and slightly offensive jokes without seeing the number of zeros in their paycheck affected, but that's not how it works. Last, today, thanks to the advancement in social media with tools like Facebook and Twitter, athletes have signed up for a 24-hour a day news conference. Right? So, if we look at statement B kind of introduces our idea. It introduces the fact that nearly 20 years ago, athletes did as they pleased, only entering public news scope if an off-the-court field dust-up was monumental. So we can start with B. So it talks about something that happened 20 years ago, and then we're talking about something that is happening at the present time sequence. Time sequence would form a mandatory pair. So we talked about something that happened in the past, we talked about something that happened 20 years ago, and now we are talking about something that is happening right now. So today, thanks to the advancement in social media with tools like Facebook and Twitter, athletes have signed up for a 24-hour a day news conference. All right. Then athletes might want the ability to make millions while still being able to crack off filter and slightly offensive jokes without seeing the number of zeros in their paycheck affected. But that's not how it works, is one option for us. Athletes may not be role models, but they are certainly digital lightning rods. This looks like a concluding statement. If we need to choose between C and A would be a better concluding statement, right? So C and then A. All right, let's have a look at the third question. Now we have questions that have MCQ in them. Right now we have questions that have MCQ in them, and this is a 4-sentence para-jumble. Let's have a look at this question. So A talks about, by reasoning we mean the mental process of drawing an inference from two or more statements or going from the inference to the statements which yield that inference. So A defines the reasoning, right? A defines reasoning, and it looks like an introductory statement, right? It does not use any words that would prevent it from becoming an introductory statement. So I can consider it to be an introductory statement. But before jumping to any conclusions, let's have a look at the other statements. So logical reasoning. So it is unlikely that an introductory statement would start with so. It is a connector, so it needs prior context. So let's leave it for now. Logic means, if we take its original meaning, the science of valid reasoning. Okay, it could be an introductory statement. D, clearly for understanding arguments and for drawing the inference correctly, it is necessary that we should understand the statement first. So now you need to understand that the paragraph here is talking about logical reasoning, right? It is talking about logical reasoning. So C first introduces or defines the meaning of logic. It says that logic means, if we take its original meaning, the science of valid reasoning, and then it defines, A defines reasoning. By reasoning, we mean the mental process, etc., etc. So C first talks about logic, and A then talks about reasoning. So C and A form a mandatory pair here. So if I want to save my time, I look at the options, I'll see which of the options here have C and A together in this particular order. And option B, right? I don't even need to, delve deeper into this question, but we will. We will try to see if B and D after C and A, they make sense or not. So C says logic means, if we take its original meaning, the science of valid reasoning, and then by reasoning we mean the mental process of drawing an inference from two or more statements, or going from the inference of the statements which yield that inference. So now logical reasoning. We talked about logic, we talked about reasoning. Now we are talking about logical reasoning. So obviously D, and then clearly for understanding arguments and drawing the inference, this would be our concluding statement. So D, C, A, B, and D would be the correct sequence. Next, again, he was born weary and soul weary. Who is this he in question? Who is this he that we are talking about? We need prior context setting. We need a subject, right? We need a subject. Where is the subject? We need to find the subject. To his horror. Again, किसके बारे में बात हो रही है? He कौन है? His कौन है? We need some prior context. Let's have a look at C. D also talks about some he. D also talks about some he. Cannot be my introductory statement. So I know for sure that my introductory statement is C. The paragraph has to start with C. And if I am witty enough, I will not devote even one more minute solving this question. Why? Because there is only one option that has C as its introductory statement. Only one option that has C as its introductory statement. The statement cannot start with A because A starts with a pronoun. It cannot start with B because B talks about to his horror. Who is this he? It cannot start with D because again D starts with he reached. Who is this he? Who is this person in picture? So C, it was one of those nights in the office when the office clock was moving towards 4 in the morning, and Dennis, so Dennis is the subject. Dennis is our subject. Dennis was still not through with the incredible mass of paper stacked before him. He was born weary and soul weary and found himself muttering, either I can't manage this place or it's unmanageable. Then he reached for his calendar and ran his eyes down each hour, half hour and quarter hour to see where his time had gone that day, the day before, the month before, and then to his horror, he realized. Why did he realize? Because this action was performed. So action, reaction, cause, effect. To his horror, he realized that he had become the victim of an amorphous, unwitting, unconscious conspiracy to immerse him in routine work that had no significance. Okay? Moving on. The likelihood of an accident is determined by how carefully the motorist drives and how carefully the pedestrian crosses the street. So now we have two subjects here, motorist and pedestrian. कहीं पे बात हुई है इनके बारे में? Let's have a look. An accident involving a motorist and a pedestrian is such a case. Such a case. What case? This needs prior context. Cannot be my introductory statement. Okay. Each must decide. Each. कौन है ये each? Right? We do not know. Let's move to the next sentence. The simplest strategic problem arises when two individuals interact with each other and each must decide what to do without knowing what the other is doing. Yes, this is a statement which is broad, which is general, which is neutral, and it makes sense on its own. It does not require any prior context setting. It makes complete sense on its own. So, D can be my opening statement. So, the simplest strategic problem arises when two individuals interact with each other and each must decide what to do without knowing what the other is doing. Now, who are these two individuals? An accident involving a motorist and pedestrian is such a case. This is the case that we are talking about. Okay, so D, then B, obviously. Let's have a look at the third sentence. Now, the likelihood of an accident is determined by how carefully the motorist drives and how carefully the pedestrian crosses the street, and each must decide how much care to exercise without knowing how careful the other is. So, A and then C would be a good concluding statement for us. So, option D, B, A, and C. Next question. We'll start with 5-sentence para-jumbles now. Michael Hoffman, a poet and translator, accepts this sorry fact. What sorry fact are we talking about? So cannot be my introductory statement. But a contradiction. We need prior context setting, cannot be my introductory statement. He acknowledges, he. Where is the subject? Cannot be my introductory statement. Hoffman feels passionately about his work, and this is clear from his writings. Yes, this could be my introductory statement, could be. Let's have a look at E. In terms of the gap between worth and rewards, translators come somewhere near nurses and street cleaners. Okay, so this sentence introduces something, right? It introduces a connotation, and what is it talking about? It is talking about that in terms of the gap between worth and rewards, how much someone is worth and are they actually being rewarded in that capacity. Translators come somewhere between nurses and street cleaners, which means that they are not given their due credit. They're not given the reward that they deserve, right? So E could be our introductory statement, and then A talks about a translator, a poet who accepts this fact. This fact. Which fact? This fact, E. So A will come after E because this sorry fact. What sorry fact are we talking about? Is the sorry fact that we are talking about. So E and A, and then Michael Hoffman, a poet and translator, accepts this sorry fact without approval or complaint, and then he acknowledges. So, noun pronoun mandatory pair. Noun pronoun mandatory pair. He acknowledges too. In fact, he returns to the point often that best translators of poetry always fail at some level. But even though he acknowledges this fact that the best translators of poetry fail at some level, thanklessness and impossibility do not daunt him. Even though he acknowledges this fact, this sorry fact, but thanklessness and impossibility do not daunt him. So B, and then finally D. Hoffman feels passionately about his work, and that is clear from his writings. Right? That is clear from his writings. So E, A, C, B, and D. E talks about something, a fact, a comparison that has been made. A then elaborates upon the fact that this person, this poet, this translator accepts this fact. What sorry fact are we talking about? This sorry fact, right? And then he acknowledges something, but even though he acknowledges that, thanklessness and impossibility do not daunt him, right? So C would be our option that we are going to choose. Next, to be culturally literate is to possess the basic information needed to thrive in the modern world. Looks like a completely doable introductory sentence. So yes, let's keep A into consideration. Nor is it cannot be the introductory statement if it is starting with nor. It is a connector, it is a connecting word, so we cannot put that as our introductory statement. It is by no means. It, again, I would not start my sentence because this needs some prior context. Cultural literacy constitutes the only sure avenue of opportunity for disadvantaged children, the only reliable way of combating the social determinism that now condemns them. Okay? Now, you need to understand here that A is introducing the topic of cultural, of being culturally literate, right? It introduces the topic of cultural literacy. It says to be culturally literate is to possess the basic information needed to thrive in the world. So far, A should be the introductory statement. Let's have a look at the last sentence. The breadth of that information is great. Now, the breadth of that information. What is this information? What is that here? This. Right? So, A and E actually form a mandatory pair here. A and E form a mandatory pair. To be culturally literate is to possess the basic information needed to thrive in the modern world. The breadth of that information, which information? This information. The breadth of that information is great, extending over the major domains of human activity from sports to science, and it is by no means confined to culture, narrowly understood as an acquaintance with the arts, nor is it confined. Again, C and B make a mandatory pair. It is by no means confined to culture, nor is it confined. So C and B make a mandatory pair. And lastly, this is a good concluding statement as it culminates everything that is being talked about in the paragraph. Cultural literacy constitutes the only sure avenue of opportunity for disadvantaged children, the only reliable way of combating the social determinism that now condemns them. So this is our summation Hence, this can be our conclusion. So A, E, C, B, and D. Moving on. Both parties use capital. Cannot be my introductory statement. What is this both? Both parties kya hai? The thief spends time and money in his attempt to steal. He buys wire cutters, and the legitimate property owner expends resources to prevent the theft. He buys locks. Okay, so we talks about the fact that the thief spends his time and money into stealing, and the property owner spends his resources into preventing that theft or protecting his property and resources. All right, let's have a look at C. A social cost of theft is that both the thief and the potential victim use resources to gain or maintain control over the property. So now C introduces this topic. C introduces this topic and B elaborates upon that topic a bit. So that is for sure. One thing that we know is for sure that C in any circumstance should come before B. C has introduced an idea. A social cost of theft is that both the thief and the potential victim use resources to gain or maintain control over property. And then B has elaborated upon that idea. So C should come before B. We know for sure. By now, we know that for sure. Next, these costs. What are these costs? We don't know. A bank may purchase more and more complicated and sophisticated safes, forcing safe crackers to invest further in safe cracking equipment. Right? So now, if we look at the sequence, okay, C talks about something. It talks about a social cost of theft is that both the thief and the victim, they spend money, they spend their resources. How? Then it talks about both parties use capital and labor in the struggle to secure property rights. Both parties, so now both parties, किस both parties के बारे में बात हो रही है? Thief and the property owner or the potential victim. So here both points to the thief and the potential victim. So C and then A and then B elaborates upon what has been talked about. Till now, क्या बात हो रही है उसका example or evidence. Example or evidence. What is the example? The thief spends time and money in his attempts to steal. He buys wire cutters, and the legitimate property owner expends resources to prevent the theft. He buys lock. So C, A, D, and then these costs. What costs? These costs. These costs may escalate as a type of technological arms race unfolds. A bank may purchase more and more complicated and sophisticated safes, forcing safe crackers to invest further in safe cracking equipment. So C, A, B, D, and E. This is how you're going to link the sentences. Next, we will first have a look at some sentences that are fixed. Okay, first let's discuss the sentences that do not have a fixed concluding and introductory statement. If we have time today, we will move on to sentences. We'll move on to questions where the first and the last sentence is fixed. Okay. First, branded disposable diapers are available at many supermarkets and drugstores. Okay, looks like a generic statement, looks like a general statement. Let's have a look at the second statement. If one supermarket sets a higher price for a diaper, customers may buy that brand elsewhere. Okay, this cannot be our introductory statement. It's a little ambiguous. So now all the options have A as their introductory statement. So we have no option but to consider A as my introductory statement. Right? So A talks about branded disposable diapers are available at many supermarkets and drugstores. B talks about if one supermarket sets a higher price for a diaper, customers may buy that brand elsewhere. C talks about by contrast, the demand for private label products may be less price sensitive since it is available only at a corresponding supermarket chain. D talks about so the demand for branded diapers at any particular store may be quite price sensitive. Okay, A and D form a mandatory pair. Why? Because A talks about something. It talks about branded disposable diapers are available at many supermarkets and drugstores. So this is the cause. And what is the effect of this statement? What is happening because of this? What is happening? The demand for branded diapers at any particular store may be quite price sensitive. Why? Why? Because branded disposable diapers are available at many supermarkets and drugstores. So, this is the cause and this is the effect. So, A and D should come together. They form a mandatory pair. Obviously, C should be the correct answer, but still we'll read through the entire paragraph. So branded disposable diapers are available at many supermarkets and drugstores. So the demand for branded diapers at any particular store may be quite price sensitive. If one supermarket sets a higher price, so this statement talks about price sensitivity and B elaborates upon that topic. Right? D talks about price sensitivity and B elaborates upon that topic. If one supermarket sets a higher price for a diaper, customers may buy that brand elsewhere. By contrast, the demand for private label products may be less price sensitive since it is available only at a corresponding supermarket chain. And then, for instance, so statement and example. C and E also form a mandatory pair. C and E also form a mandatory pair. If you're not able to recognize one mandatory pair, you can recognize the other. C and E form a mandatory pair. C is a statement. E is an example to that statement. C talks about something, E is an example. For instance, only Savon drug stores sell Savon drug diapers. Then stores should set a higher incremental margin percentage for private label diapers. Again, F elaborates upon C and E, telling us that then stores should set a higher margin percentage for private label diapers. E introduces the concept of private label diapers and F further elaborates upon that concept. So not only C and E and F also form a mandatory pair. E and F also form a mandatory pair. So our correct option by all means would be option C. Next, but in the industrial era, but cannot be my introductory statement. So in the agrarian era cannot be my introductory statement. Now in the information era, so one thing that I understand that ये जो paragraph है कुछ ना कुछ time sequence follow कर रहा है, कुछ ना कुछ टाइम सीक्वेंस फॉलो कर रहा है. नाउ सो एरा के बारे में बात हो रही है, डिफरेंट एरास के बारे में, 3 एरास के बारे में बात हो रही है, कुछ तो टाइम सीक्वेंस यहाँ पे फॉलो हो रहा है. हाउ डू यू बैटल विद योर एनिमी? अ क्वेश्चन, राइट? क्वेश्चन का आंसर मिल जाए तो एक मैंडेटरी पेयर मिल जाएगा and it will become easier for us to solve the question. So how do you battle? Because question and answer would form a good mandatory pair. Question and answer would form a good mandatory pair. How do you battle with your enemy? The idea is to destroy the enemy's productive capacity, and depending upon the economic foundation, that productive capacity is different in each case. So this is my question and this is my answer. So D and E for sure form a mandatory pair. This I am sure about. I have one clue. What is that clue? That D and E form a mandatory pair. Next, with regard to defense, the purpose of the military is to defend the nation and be prepared to battle with its enemy. Now, this introduces the concept. This introduces the concept. This is my introductory statement. So, it should start with F. And one thing that I established, D and E should come together. They form a mandatory pair. So there is only one option that starts with F and it has D and E together as a mandatory pair. So A here would be my correct option. I do not need to go any further, right? I can if I want to, but it's not required. The idea here, the intent here is to save time. Right? If we look at the next question, you will see that the first and the sixth statement, the introductory statement and the concluding statement, both these statements are fixed. So now I cannot move these two statements. One is for sure my introductory statement. One is for sure my introductory statement. D is for, 6 is for sure my concluding statement. I cannot move these statements. Let's have a look at the introductory statement. According to recent research, the critical period for developing language skills is between the age of 3 and 5 years. Now let's have a look at the second statement. Which statement should follow? The read to child already has a large vocabulary and a sense of grammar and sentence structure. Children who are read to in these years have a far better chance of reading well in school, indeed of doing well in all their subjects. And the reason is actually quite simple. This correlation is far and away the highest yet found between home influences and school success. Their comprehension of language is therefore very high. Now, one talks about the critical period of developing language skills is between the age of 3 and 5 years. It gives us a bracket. It talks about an age bracket. What age bracket is it talking about? It talks about the fact that the critical period for developing language skills is between 3 and 5 years. And if you look at statement B, children who are read to in these years is correlating to 3 and 5 years here. These years is correlating to 3 and 5 years, something that has been talked about in statement 1. Okay, so I know for sure that B should come after 1 because these years that has been talked about in B, it correlates to statement 1. So, according to recent research, the critical period for developing language skills is between the age of 3 and 5 years. Children who are read to in these years have a far better chance of reading well in school, indeed of doing well in all their subjects. So, I know for sure that B should come after 1. So, D is the correct option. Still, let's have a look. This correlation is far and away the highest. What correlation? The correlation between the reading and which age that the children are being read to at. Right? This correlation is far and away the highest yet found between home influences and school success. The read to child already has a large vocabulary and a sense of grammar and sentence structure, and their comprehension of language is therefore very high. Their comprehension. किसकी comprehension की यहाँ पे बात हो रही है? Read to child की. What does this there correlate to? This pronoun there, what is it correlating to? The read to child. So again, A should be the last statement before the concluding statement. Because A and the concluding statement, A and 6 form a mandatory pair. 1 and B form a mandatory pair. A and 6 form a mandatory pair. So now I have two proofs that D should be my correct answer. All right, so that would be all for today. And keep practicing. The more you practice, the better you're going to get at Para-Jumbles. It is a topic which is quite, difficult. I won't say it's impossible to crack a question or to attempt a question accurately, but most of the times it is a tough nut to crack. So the only possible way to be good at it is to practice as much as you can. We'll be practicing questions together, goes without saying, but you at your end should also keep on practicing questions pertaining to Para-Jumbles till you achieve that 100% accuracy, right? Type in the answer type questions are a little more difficult than MCQ questions, because in an MCQ question, even if you're sure about one statement or one mandatory pair, you're going to crack the question, right? So that is all for today's class. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next class.